Hey everyone, I'm Raphi Salem again for Manhattan Edit Workshop here with Josh Apter and Jason Banke. Today's guests are Jeffrey Wolf and Zach Wolf. Are they related? We're about to find out. So, Josh, Jason, please take it away, introduce yourselves and the Mew.
All right. Thanks, Rafi, and Jeff and Zach for joining. My name is Josh Apter. I'm the founder of Manhattan Edit Workshop. We've been doing our thing, training editors and graphic designers and people in production for over 20 years, if you can believe it. I have the gray to prove it. And we started doing these conversations as just a way to reflect back on, what was editing like then? What is it like now? And what are current trends? And um, I've been working with Jason. How long have you been at the Manhattan Edit Workshop? I'll let you tell me. You've been there a long time too.
14 years, maybe 13 years. I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah, I think I met Jeff at Edit Fest, maybe
Oh
the
my
first Edit
gosh. Yeah.
Fest New York, maybe.
Yep.
hmm So a little
Been a
background:
long
we
time.
used to co-produce Edit Fest New York for American cinema editors, and they moved there. They started doing it as Edit Fest Global, and they were doing it in Toronto and London, and we picked up where they left off and started Sight, Sound, and Story, and having our own production and editing seminars. This is an offshoot. This is adjacent. This is Sight, Sound, and Story esque, but not quite. This is much more casual and conversational. But let's introduce Jeff Wolf and Zach, his son. Jeffrey, we've known you almost as long as we've been open, I would think, right?
I may have been there the first year you opened, yes. And
Yes,
you've
and
always been on the cutting edge, so to speak, yes, of all the.
yes. Well, it's funny because we've been recording, even when we did things like an artist in residence would come and speak at the Editors Guild, we'd record it for whatever reason, and we didn't really have an agenda. We just thought it would be good to have that, and it turned out to be stuff that people have watched on YouTube years and years and years later. So it's educational information. It's insight into you know what an editor's work and life is like. But tell us a little about what's been going on with you recently, and then of course feed into, I don't know which square he's in on your screen, but there's this guy who looks a lot like you who's kind of taking the baton.
He's the guy who I took to see Ghostbusters when he was 14 months old, and he in a backpack, and he watched along with me. And then when he was around 4, where he was watching some like Greek mythology show on TV, and he heard the music kind of get revved up and excited, and he said something bad's going to happen. And I said, how did you know? And he said, because I heard the music. So I sort of knew he was on that track already to sort of understand how all this worked. And then I think in high school, Zach directed a short, and he asked me if he could come into the editing room and I would edit with him. And after I made the first cut, he said, why did you cut it there? And I and I knew I was in trouble all the way around. So yeah, so go ahead, Zach. You were going to say something. Oh.
No. I was just talking about my what was going to happen in my diaper when I knew something bad was about to happen. But go on.
Okay. Yeah. So then I'm going to go more toward the transition of Zach, and I think it was on a movie I was doing in California. Zach came out with me and was the office PA on a film that I was editing. I think it was called The Long Shot. And then we worked together for about 5 films until we couldn't stand each other's company anymore. And I felt that he had enough information to go on his own. And but what's different is, like, I came into this business in the transition between Moviola / Steam Deck, but I was a Moviola guy, and the Lightworks, and so everything along the way, I always kind of adapted from the older school. Like when I set up the Lightworks, I set it up like a film project. When I had to work on a Final Cut Pro, I had them set it up like a Avid. I mean, I was always sort of chasing the technology as it was moving forward. Where somebody like Zach and somebody who goes to the Manhattan Edit Workshop, they learn this whole new this language that kind of developed around the making, the editing of films, which I never really had. It's sort of, I wouldn't say I was the equivalent of a hunt and peck typist, but I didn't have like that big picture of what today's Avid editors have. Yeah, so origin stories, is that where you
Well, that
wanna
was
talk about?
you made me think of something, which is the, when you think about the work you're doing as an editor on a moviola, do you think that someone like Zach learning on something that is inherently faster, maybe more disposable than a physical edit that requires undoing and tracking bins, in a hamper, like, is that process inherently the same exact thing if you think about it that way? Or is the way that editors today are coming up with different tools do you think it changes the way they approach their work?
Mm-hmm. I would say nonlinear editing was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it was more in the way I thought about things. I'd like, when I would cut a scene, I actually would like starting in the middle and moving out of the scene, like getting to the most, rather than sort of backing myself into a corner of a scene as I was moving from the beginning to the end. I would try to find the essence of the scene first and then kind of build back out from that. And nonlinear editing really helped in that. I used this quote earlier today. It's from John Wooden. He said, "Hurry up, but don't rush." So speed can be your friend, and it can be it can work against you as well. But so, like, remember there used to be a thing where you could go into a mix studio and you could get the half-hour mix, the 1 hour mix, the 2 hour mix, depending on like what degree of time that you had or money that you had to spend. Yeah, I don't know. I was much faster, I think, before I had so many choices. I think I was in some ways faster on a Moviola than I was on an Avid. But, and
By
actually,
And the
by
whole
being decisive, right?
yeah, I actually started on a Lightworks, which I like that system very much. It just for various reasons never caught on, but other than Thelma Schumacher, but who still
but
uses it.
also I guess like the ability to dupe a sequence and cut it, 30 times, you couldn't do that before the kind of the digital workflow. So there's probably definitely some positives and some negatives to be able to try one thing so many different times. I mean, you might end up with magic, but you're probably not thinking as much in each version. Like, is this that can actually work? Where if you had to make like a work print or stuff that I don't really even know about.
Are you
So
making
I have to just say for the record, I do this on every time we record. My son is in film school. He's graduating film school right now. And I showed him all these movies from the 80s, from when I grew up, the classics. And I didn't show him Ghostbusters, but I showed him a bunch of other stuff. Maybe I did show him Ghost. And he said, "Oh, the quality of this film." Like, at the age of 13, he was already a snob about the quality. I'm curious, Zach, did you have somewhat of a similar, like Jaws? You could see that it's a mechanical shark. It's not real. Did you have any of that?
No, I mean, I had more like where he tried to show me the classics, and some of them I guess I probably wasn't ready, like The Great Santini or something like that. I remember he loved, and I think when I first watched it at like age 4 or something, I probably wasn't ready for it. But then being able to revisit some of those classics, as I started getting a little older and more into the storytelling and the making of movies, I've definitely like appreciated some of those kind of classics more. But no, I was watching Mallrats 50 times and movies like that. I wasn't necessarily a cinephile.
But also I remember this movie, Say Anything, that you saw it when you had an older sister and you saw it when you were very young, and then you saw it again several years later, and you identified more with the Kuzak character than you did with the younger brother, for instance. There is that's the great thing, is that there's Josh talks about the 20 years. It's all history. We don't think of it as history as much as it's become history. Certainly it's become history for me. And the other thing I just want to say is part of all this, in California, in Hollywood, you can meet a projectionist whose great grandfather was also a projectionist, in LA. So it like was like 3 or 4 generations, where in New York, like we're Zach and I are one of the few sort of father-son, mother-daughter kind of teams out there. There were a few others before us, but I'm not sure like what happened next. Eric Albertson had a son who became an editor, Sean Albertson. But somebody told me recently, Norman Holland's wife, Janet, told me that her daughter was in school with DeDe Allen's son, a grandson, at UCLA. So I mean, there's the beginning. New York is beginning to have that kind of history.
Mhm.
So
Well, Zach, did you think that you were going to want to do this? Or were you in it for directing? You said you made a short when you were in high school, but when you started formally studying this, do you think it was, I love this part of some people love shooting, some people love directing, producing, some people love putting all the pieces together and editing. I mean, how did that develop? And was there, I mean, obviously the influence is there, right? Because
Mhm.
it's right, it's in your blood, so to speak. But, was there a time and a place where you said, this is where I fit?
Well, I mean, I always thought I was going to be a professional soccer player, so I wasn't worrying about my film career. No, but I mean, from an early age, I remember just sitting on his couch and sitting behind him and watching him, do his thing and getting annoyed that I couldn't watch, more of the scene and just seeing like the same line over and over again. But that being said, I always enjoyed, sitting back there and seeing the process. So out of film school, I definitely editing was something I knew I wanted to get into at some point, but I did go a route where, I worked on set, I worked in the office, I worked on the Chronicles of Narnia and Prince Caspian, in Prague on set for like 6 months. So I did think it was cool to like see how a movie comes together and all the different departments, because when you are, working as an editor, it's good to be able to know who does what, and during dailies and stuff when you're talking to scripty and to the different departments to kind of know how a film comes together. So I do think that was like beneficial to have kind of had that life experience on set and seeing kind of how films come together.
I have a question, Zach. Like, with your dad, you had the 5 films you work with him on to like pass the torch, learn things. How are you passing on things to people that are working under you now? I mean, is it the same? I mean, I feel like there's so much remote stuff or people working on different computers in different rooms. Like, how's that working?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people kind of learn their ways from their mentor or mentors, and then take a lot of that and kind of teach the people coming up below them similar processes. And then you adapt some of your own stuff that you've learned along the way. But the work from home, I think, has totally hurt the kind of mentor mentee relationship, and especially like at the lowest level, like even like an editing PA or an apprentice, just from the work from home, some of those jobs have kind of gone out, become absent with all the work from home. So I think there's definitely to have the ability to have everyone in the office and together and kind of it's also just like the downtime between when you're working on things that you can discuss different things about past jobs and kind of pass on info to the different people.
do you think that the COVID and the strike made this staying at home and working thing, would it have happened without those things? You think that's ultimately where we're going,
I mean, I know some other editors that have been hybrid from way before COVID. But I think on any project, there's a time and a place where you need to be in the room with your director or with your producer, or whoever, and working together in the same room.
I agree
Yeah,
with that.
it was a forcing mechanism to do things that, I mean, I'm talking to colorists in LA saying, like, instead of having to be in my car for 4 hours to watch a cut down, I can get a calibrated iPad in my house and do the same work. do more work faster.
Mm.
And then people like we were talking to a former student who's an editor in Boston who really misses the idea of being around other people, the energy of being at a facility with all the other editors and powwowing regularly. Hey, come here, take a look at this. Kind of like you lose something in that complete digital work from home environment. And it's funny because we were just talking about, MPE, Sound One, and these places where people like they were like hives of activity. And you go in there and learn the craft, find a mentor, work up and get a job. And you're just surrounded by people, one of which could just pop their head into the room and say, like, hey, come here. Can you do this? And maybe you lie or you don't. And you're like, sure, of course. And you end up,
Mhm.
you've got this job and you're moving up. And it's just things like that. Sort of, it completely disregards some of that magic that happens when people are working in a place together and have that kind of thing that they share in common. So I'm not sure it would
It
have
also
happened anyway, but I'm sort of sad that it has to this degree.
it also hurts relationships sometimes with people you've been working with. Like I was on Ray Romano's directorial debut, and it was all during COVID, and we worked together for a year straight, over like Evercast, and I only met him twice in person. So, again, with that like downtime where you're talking about sports or whatever you kind of bond over, you kind of lose that just, chatting when you're kind of waiting for an export to happen or something like that. So I think it's like harder to build those kind of lasting relationships when it's strictly over Zoom or Evercast or something like that.
Mhm.
Going back to the location, also, New York City is a special place because you can't drive in New York City. You take a subway, and you were talking about the Brill Building, Josh and Jason, when we were doing the prep for this. Eh, I'm curious about the vibe of New York City, Jeffrey. Starting with you, the vibe of New York City versus outside of New York City. Um, how does that even compare? Even obviously before COVID, we're talking about decades before COVID.
Yeah. Well, first of all, there were, three big sound houses. There was, or finishing houses, editing suites. Well, it was called Image Sound at the time, Trans Audio and Magnum. And Image Sound eventually became Sound One. And I literally started in the first room in Sound One, and on a movie called Honeysuckle Rose. And Alicia Birnbaum, who owned the company, kind of grew the rentals from out of that one room until it became a 4 or 5 floor phenomenon. Um, but so there were like 4 or 5 key editors, but like DeDe was probably at the head of it, and DeDe kind of brought in the first time really big Hollywood directors were coming in to New York, and she, her world, which was a big world that she created, started out the careers of many editors like Jerry Greenberg, who did French Connection, and Craig McKay, who did all Jonathan Demme's films, and Steve Roder, who became very successful. I think he did The Right Stuff. So I mean, these are they created it was a very small group of us, and it took a long time to progress through the system, but we learned everything. I mean, we all started kind of as sound apprentices, picture apprentices, sound assistants, sound assistants, until we got into editing. And so it felt like it took a really long time to get that opportunity to edit. And if you were, in some ways, like there were, I don't want to say there were people who would hold you down, but like if you were able to jump ahead and get something done, it wasn't always taken very, very in a very nice way. It was just a very tight group. And anyway, but the result of all that was New York became a thing, and LA started recruiting people from New York to come out there, and and they love that kind of independence, and then they try to soften that independence while you're out there. But New York editors became a thing. And now, even now, you go to LA, there's a ton of New York editors formerly here working there who were trained here. Is that your question, or?
Yeah, it's all related. I wanted
But
to shift.
I think what you're also talking about is the camaraderie. Like Zach just started a writer, an editors guild softball team. Well, some of that came from
We need help.
some of that came from during the first writers' strike. I think it was in the 80s or 90s. I joined the Writers Guild softball team that I played on for 40 years, and Zach played on that. As he got older, and the camaraderie of that was something that was missing from the rest of the field once things started to change. And cell phones changed things a lot too, that you could go out into the field and play, and if something important came up, you could go take care of that. But we used to have there were a lot of picnics and games and camaraderie and trickery. I mean, that's the thing that's missing completely with digital at home, is that putting shaving cream in somebody's headphones, or or standing behind them and making this humming sound, like a sound editor, like driving them crazy because they think there's a bug in their ear, or such many variations of that. Michael Jacoby once completely disassembled my work table so if you touched it, all the rewinds would fall off, and the legs would fall off the table, but that's missing, some of it for good. But yeah, I don't feel that so much anymore. But I'm when I bring on an assistant, I tend to like work hard to get them to understand my system and the way I like to work, and that's not just editing, that's sort of a whole gestalt kind of thing. And I think what Zach was saying earlier, like on this movie that he's working on now, the editor that he's working with uses a completely different system than I do in terms of how he sets up the editing room and how he deals with certain kind of things. And so that's, that takes some adapting to.
I would also say, just to piggyback off of, I think what you were asking also, is that I feel like there's no longer those like 5 or 10 maybe New York editors and LA editors that everyone kind of comes up under. So I think we're missing a little bit of that kind of, I guess, I don't know, like the kind of, not even mentorship, but like these kind of classic OG editors that kind of everyone is somewhat of a disciple under, kind of like, an Alan Heim or DeDe Allen or one of those kind of people. I think, to kind of almost tying into the work from home thing too, it's like everyone's just kind of off and able to do their projects in their little, cubicles, wherever they are.
I just wanted to bring up two more topics and then move on to what you're working on now. I'm very curious about style and influence. Jeff, who are you influenced by, and did that influence your style? And then going to the father-son, there should be some influence, but I'm curious, what's going through my head is the whole classic generation, and then the MTV generation, and then the and then now that I call the YouTube generation. So Jeff, why don't you take that?
Well, what's interesting, I worked as I was in the industry longer, I worked with the MTV generation too. They were younger than me, like a Ted Demme came out of Yo Rap MTV, and that's when I first started doing like a lot more African American subject matter, because he kind of came out of that world, and it was a very hip Wyclef Jean and Dave Stewart and that kind of that kind of exposure. But
Yo MTV Raps and Wyclef Jean, just for the record.
Yeah,
he was trying to make a point about his generation. So mispronouncing is intentional. Please continue.
I'm better visually than I am orally. So remind me again where we're starting.
We're talking about style and influence, and I'm wondering if Zach.
No, I have an answer to that. Is that many times when I'm editing, I go, "Oh, that's a Barry Malkin cut," or "That's something DeDe would do," or like I have all these references because I worked with all those people, and I would say that the person I most admired in that regard was like a Barry Malkin, who was a very, very musical guy, and he would work the moviola like it was a saxophone or an instrument, where you could kind of get, there's a certain kind of rhythm that he would create in the room from that. And that was always something I kept in the back of my head. And somebody like DeDe, whose brain like was on fire all the time. She was like, had a million thoughts in her head at the same time. And the assistant would always have to like run around trying to keep up with her to kind of do it. But it was this, manic almost, like get an idea and try to go as fast as you can to execute the idea so that you can hold on to it. So I think when I said earlier about, like I often would go to the most important part of the scene first to kind of get all the creative juices going there first. And I think that came out of her a little bit as well. So the answer is, and then externally, I would go out. If I was struggling with a problem, I would go see a movie, or I'd watch something, or I'd go for a walk, and you get kind of an inspiration from that. But I would say it's a cross fertilization. Definitely.
Zach, so did any of that rub off on you, or did you, say, I'm going to you're going to rebel against your father and do things a little differently?
I mean, editing influence is like kind of it's a strange thing. It's like when someone wants like your reel, it's like a weird thing to send a reel as an editor. Like you want to send a scene. So like unless you're really trying to do a stylized, sorry, unless you're trying to do a really stylized edit, editing is something theoretically you're not supposed to notice. But I guess style wise, I grew up on a lot of his movies that he did with Demme, and I feel like those were always very like authentic, character driven movies that were like very realistic. So I kind of always have prided myself in cutting that I've done, like being able to read performances and make it feel natural, make it feel authentic. So I think that's one thing I would definitely have taken away from over the years of like watching those movies in general, and just my dad cutting those kind of performances.
But also, those 90s films you mentioned, like were Zach's growing up years, like either college or end of high school. So like in Zach's high school yearbook, you know how they put quotes next to your picture? They were all from Billy Madison, right?
Right there.
And I did Beautiful Girls, and Beautiful Girls became like this college kid, like fantasy film. Zach can probably talk more about it, but it became like in that generation a very, maybe not a blockbuster on one hand, but very well-known film for that, and then in terms of the other thing, in terms of style, I was called to go work on Holes, and Andy Davis's movie, and he didn't really want, like a second editor to come on, but the studio wanted me to come on, and so in a case like that, I picked something that I had edited that kind of would show all the possible things that I could do in one scene, which was a scene from the movie Life, where Eddie Murphy, wants to, in his jail cells, talking about a nightclub that he wants to open. And so it kind of brings a lot of characters in, and a lot of sound, and a lot of overlapping, and it's the kind of thing that you can sell on. And but what Zach is saying is true. When somebody ever asked me for a reel, I never knew what to give them exactly. But
So let's move into today. It's 2024. What are you guys all working on?
you go first, Zach.
All right. Well, I have a movie that came out this past, I guess, February called Who Invited Charlie? That was shot over COVID, about like a family that quarantines out in the Hamptons during the heart of COVID. And a long lost friend shows up to the house and ruins their quarantine, but in doing so brings this kind of broken family together. So that was a fun one. That I think that's on Stars for free, and then on iTunes and all those places to rent or buy. But I'm currently on A Quiet Place, the prequel, which comes out June 28th, I believe. So we're rushing to the finish line to try to get that done.
Is that going to have the original cast like de-aged or something? Like what's the
No, so it's day one in New York City, following a different character of people.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
The
different
original
families.
starts at day 34, is that what you said, or something?
I think it starts at like day 87 or something like that, and then in the second one they flash back to day one, but it's in a like a town in upstate New York. So this is the
Mhm.
heart of New York City when the strike happens.
Yeah,
Speaking of
Zach, talk
which,
about the Israeli film that you did, because that's interesting in that it became sort of more focused on after October 7th. So it's
Yeah, I mean, it was a movie called Listen about a woman that works in the IDF, and it's about a past trauma where her father was killed by a suicide bomber, and then fast forward to when she's an adult working um, in IDF, or a member of IDF, and a Jewish soldier gets kidnapped, and it's kind of this moral dilemma of, once they find out where they are, the guy that had orchestrated the plan to kill her father, do you take out him and all these soldiers while possibly killing an Israeli POW? So it had been done, I guess, like 2 years ago, but it's finally doing the festival circuit and stuff. So obviously this stuff has happened a lot over the time, but it's obviously super current, um, like current events and present of what's going on right now. So kind of can change the attitude as to right and wrong, and kind of even further kind of her character and her decisions that she makes.
interesting. You've talked about three very different kinds of films, right? Um, and Jeffrey, you've done all kinds of different things. I feel that you're more of I don't want to call you a comedy director. You have a gift at cutting comedy, but you've cut all kinds of films too.
mhm.
But I mean, so is there something you feel that holds your interest more, Zach? Do you gravitate more towards something that's, a thriller like Quiet Place, or the Who Invited Charlie seems more, I want to say it sounds like more lighthearted, but I don't
Yeah.
know. But and then the IDF thing sounds very dramatic. This is the thing about an editor. It's like you'll have this in there and someone's going to want to see some other movie before they'll hire you for their movie, but you're like, well, I didn't cut that. I cut that, but you have a pretty good cross section already.
Sure.
Is there, do you respond to material based on theme or tone, or, or you just like do the work?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you want to work on something that has a good script and the blueprint of what the movie's going to be. But I guess going back to to the Ted Demme movies that I kind of grew up with, no matter kind of what I'm working on, even if it's like Who Invited Charlie, that is a dramedy, kind of veering more to the comedy side of it. But I always try to like keep that naturalistic, kind of authentic tone to it, and never, the comedy might get very over the top and you might want to use all the most ridiculous parts, but I still like keeping it to a point where it feels natural, because I feel like that's where comedy kind of flows the best, and for my liking.
What's interesting about that is that Zach just described what I do. So I mean, I think it did rub off. It sounds like it rubbed off a little bit, because that's the kind, I mean, particularly with Ted Demme, the comedy coming out of out of drama. And even stylistically, like what I would do is I would often cut for the drama and then go back and polish the comedy after. The comedy sort of came easier for me than the drama, but producers often they want to see the movie that they're already making, so it becomes tricky. I mean, it was much easier for me to get comedy jobs than it was to get dramatic jobs, because my track record was more dramatic, it was more comedy, but I enjoyed mixing it up. Like I think that was a conscious choice to mix it up, because I didn't want to feel like I was repeating. After a while, like for 20 years, I was getting the same Billy Madison script over and over again, and it just in a different format.
Right.
So
No, it's
Sounds like a
interesting.
dream.
Like Stephen Rotter got but late in his career, pigeonholed after doing Enchanted. He
Mhm.
started being the guy to do like the Disney-ish live action musical, like it, and he's like, I did this thing, the right stuff. World according to Garp, like, but it's difficult to strike a balance.
It
It
is.
sounds like you're well on your way, Zach, to having that already, which is terrific.
Yeah, that's the plan. That's the goal.
Yeah. Are
But
you in LA now, or are you in New York now?
no, I'm in New York.
You're in New
Yeah.
York. Okay.
Yeah.
Editing are you in looks
I'm
like
in company 3.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
The best post house in New York. Give them a
Good
shout out.
Exactly. Well, you've got a movie coming out soon. Jeffrey, do you have anything you want to shout out for that's happening? You
Well,
said you a lot of stuff spinning around, but anything particular?
well, I'll talk about because the last 3 films I did were for Netflix, and it was an interesting last, I guess, Christmas. I did a movie called Best Christmas Ever, which was a directed by Mary Lambert, who's kind of a contemporary of mine. So it was fun to sort of work with somebody like that, as opposed to the 2 films before. Like, there was a big age gap between us, and that sometimes works out better than other times, I can say. And I started making my own documentaries, and so I've had 2 feature documentaries out in the last 10 years or so. And the one I finished a few years ago opened at the Film Forum, and it does really well on cable, and I think it's on PBS right now. It's called Bill Trailer Chasing Ghosts. It's an art film about an outsider artist. But the things I'm developing are in different stages of development. But one is a film that somebody's been working on for 15 years, and Jeannie and I met him, and he saw our film and asked if we could help him finish his film. So it's a beautiful film, but he's been working on it so long that it actually feels a little dated. And so we kind of spent 6 months trying to figure out how to fix that, and we came up with a strategy to do it, and we're very excited about that. We probably will start shooting that in the summer. And then, Sam Pollard and I have gotten together on a bunch of different projects that we're trying to get streamers to pick up, because the world of raising money for your own films is pretty much over, because the streamers now want to make things from scratch with their control over everything. So it's become more of a pitching game for us. Like we'll go pitch like 10 different ideas to them, and they'll, if we're lucky, they'll take one of them. So that's kind of where I'm at. But that's it's okay. I always wondered what directors did when they weren't, out shooting.
But
Now,
one of the things we've discussed in past recordings is that if you're making a documentary, you have to be passionate. And
that's very much so.
just to segue into our last segment, if there's one takeaway that you would want someone watching this to take away, why don't we hear from Jeff and Zach and Josh and Jason, and then we'll wrap things up.
A good answer when you asked that question before. I've kind of somebody else go first.
This is for working like a father-son kind of thing, or just
All
in
the
general in
above.
the business?
It's D. All the answers are right.
Well, in terms of working with your father or your parent, I guess, spend a lot of time with your mom before the job starts, because you never want to see them once the job starts. But no, in terms of the editing room and being an editor, I would say just having as many skill sets as possible, because a lot of times now, the sound people, the VFX people, the music people, none of them come on until later on. So your music editing, your sound designing, you're doing temp VFX. So we're just kind of expected to do all those things now. So being able to kind of have those skills is super helpful.
All right. Who's next?
I'll only follow up by saying, in terms of, because I don't edit the kind of things you guys edit. I used to a long time ago. I didn't have the stomach for it. couldn't be a freelancer if I tried. I was too cowardly. And maybe a little too, I don't even know what it was. I got into too many fights with directors. But I was editing last night and looked down, got into the work. It's more of like a promo, like faster feeling thing. But I looked down and looked up, and 2 hours went by, and I felt that thing. And I don't want, I like, you know, regardless of whether you're working remote or working in a place or with a group or not, but like there's a thing about editing that's very intimate and engaging. And I love that that's something I can still have access to, even if it's not something that I do as a full-time career, to get to, what do they call it, flow state, even on something that's not some big giant statement, but you get sucked in. And it made me remember, like, part of why I love that is because you just look up and you're like, why is it 2 a.m? Like,
I mean, that's very nicely put, Josh. And, I think that I think you have to sort of be predisposed to be an editor. There's certain personality traits that go along with it. And, but you mentioned one of them, Raphi, that I think you have to be equally as passionate about editing as no matter what, if it's a documentary or a narrative. And you have to be like you have to enjoy problem solving, because it's one big jigsaw puzzle, and you're making thousands of decisions a day, and you can't be afraid of making decisions or making mistakes, because you learn every day. You learn from those mistakes. And those kind of eureka aha moments that you have, they're kind of like the sit back and smoke a cigarette moment, that I cracked this. I made something work that people were struggling with. And I think that there are other parts of the industry that you can be interested in, and it's difficult because like, it was very hard for me to be an editor and a director at the same time. I kind of had to leave editing behind pretty much to concentrate on directing, because they're very different crafts. I never liked working in a room just by myself. Having a collaborative director is really, really important. Somebody who has like a perspective on the material is really important. And when it works, I worked with George C.Wolf. He used to call shooting the rehearsal and editing the performance. And I take that to heart. I think that's very much the case.
Well,
I'll
go ahead,
say one
Jason.
thing quickly is
Yeah.
one thing I would take away is I did appreciate you were talking about the softball team. Just that, relationships are still a key thing. And to hear that you're doing that, I mean, you don't know, that could lead to your next job or a relationship that you could build down later down the road. I think that, even with all this digital stuff going on and what we're doing right now, even building that stuff is still going to be key to keeping people's careers going and building on that and meeting people and ending up where you're going to end up. That's what I thought was pretty cool to hear that.
Until you bench Thelma.
Yeah, that too.
Nice.
So,
Actually, when you were talking about softball, I was just like, I want to work in a strike joke, but maybe I don't, because
we're calling ourselves the Cutters, which out of context is kind of strange.
Yeah, that's not gonna.
Yes, please do though.
Jason, I wanted to end off with the obvious Manhattan Edit Workshop. All these skills that we're talking about, we can learn at the Manhattan Edit Workshop. So
Yep, we're still we have classes running every week or monthly. The 6th week is starting in 2 weeks. Jeff has been an artist in residence of that. We're still bringing in great people to come and talk to the students. We have a couple events coming up. We have one with the editors of The Bear that should be coming out soon, and a real cool color event as well. So stuff to stay tuned for.
To add to that, when I did this last film for Netflix, I hadn't worked on a film in 2 years because I was finishing my project. And it was during COVID, I think, and Josh arranged for me to have a 1-day tutoring session with one of their instructors just to get back into the Avid flow. And it was very, 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 very helpful. I don't think I learned anything new, but I felt much more confident again after work. So
That's funny. Well, that's, and that's part of what goes back to community, whether it's a softball team or a mixer that Ace will have or something like they have to find it somehow, um, and nurture it, because it isn't something you just walk in the door to a place where everybody is working together anymore. So maybe this does a little bit
yeah,
of
Ace
that.
New York has gotten very proactive with that. We've been doing once a month a screening at Metrograph with a major movie and an editor talking. I just did one. I moderated one of 7 people, including myself, who had worked with DeDe Allen after watching Slaughterhouse-Five. Michael Miller just did Raising Arizona. Sam Pollard in June is going to do Four Little Girls, a movie he edited for Spike Lee, and be interviewed for that. So those are camaraderie events as well. There's an open bar afterward, and everybody has fun. So I think that that's going forward. I think it's really important. And
All right,
even
well,
in just one other thing is that even in the union negotiations, I was told that lifestyle is becoming one of the negotiating points. That it used to just be like the obvious things, and now people are realizing that they're not spending they don't get enough leisure time to actually get out there and live a life. So I'm all for that as well.
all right. Well, thank you very much, Josh Apter, Jason Banke from Manhattan Edit Workshop, and of course our very special guests, Jeffrey and Zach Wolf. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you.